This is good morning, everybody. It's 9:31 a.m. in Los Angeles time. It's 11:30 in the morning in Chicago, 12:30 in New York, 5:30 at London, and who knows what time around the world. This is episode number 6 of Westock Online. And my name is Chuck Braverman. I'm the moderator, and today we have a very special show. We have Steve James as an exclusive guest. Usually we have 4 or 5 guests. Today it's just Steve James, and there's a good reason for that. Steve is, I'm getting feedback, I'm being told, audio, and there's not much I can do about it right now because I don't know what to do about it. Richard, stop sending me texts, please. It's getting dinging in my ear. Steve James is nominated for an Academy Award this year. It's actually not his first nomination, although most people don't know that. He was nominated for an editor, I believe, on Hoop Dreams. And he, in my opinion, is a fairly extraordinary kind of Renaissance guy who does everything in the documentary world. And I've been curious about him for a long time. And we just met a couple of weeks ago at the Directors Guild. I asked him if we could do a show on him, and he said yes. So let's hope this works out all right with some of the audio issues that we're still having. But before we go forward, I want to thank our sponsors. I want to make sure that everybody knows that we have 3 wonderful sponsors who have been very supportive from the beginning. Pond 5 is the largest supplier of stock footage in the world because they're, to some degree, they're crowdsourced. And you, if you're a filmmaker, you go to pond5.com and you can figure out how to upload some of your high quality footage and sell it through Pond 5 so you can have access to everybody in the world. And besides stock footage, they have After Effects, they have music, they have sound effects. It's really an incredible resource. I highly recommend them. Media Central, if you need original footage and you need a cameraman in Timbuktu or Paris or New York or Los Angeles or anywhere, call Jay at Media Central. I've used them for years, and Jay has the best cameraman around the world. What do you need? You need a Red, you need an Arri, you need a run and gun cameraman, whatever you need. Give Jay a call at Media Central. And LumaForge are the filmmakers that have become producers of hard drives. Their Jellyfish is I've got all the media on my Jellyfish right now, and these guys are really into giving you the fastest hard drives that will work with Final Cut Pro or Premiere Pro or your Avid or any of your nonlinear editing systems. So give Sam Mestman or Patrick Southern or anybody a call at LumaForge, lumaforge.com. So now we're going to get into the introduction of Steve James. He's, I don't know, it's a pretty amazing filmmaker. It's something that you can aspire to. One of the things I was thinking about the introduction this morning and what makes Steve different from some other filmmakers that we know, it seems like each one of his films is different and unique and a different challenge. So let me introduce Steve James, live from his home office in Chicago. Good morning, Steve. How are you?
Great to be here. I'm fine.
Good, thank you. I guess we have to start with your most infamous film, Hoop Dreams, which I believe was released in 1994. I'm fortunate enough to have gotten a DVD from the Criterion Collection, and my plan was actually to sort of skip through it because it's almost 3 hours long. And it's physically possible on the DVD, but it's psychologically it's impossible. I sat down 2 days ago I'd seen this when it first came out, of course, and I could not skip through it because the characters are so compelling, and I was sort of stunned at how impactful the inside access to the subjects was, and how the camera did become sort of invisible, and how they became comfortable from, it seemed like, from day one. And I'm curious as to how this film started and what the process was. Can you tell us a little about, I know you were with them for 5 years, I believe, 4 or 5 years. So can you tell us about that?
Yeah, close to 5 years. You know, we started the film. I mean, I had the idea to do the film back when I was in grad school at Southern Illinois University, and I got inspired one day down at the rec center gym. But the original inspiration was to do a film focused on the street game, and I knew I was going to move to Chicago, and I thought Chicago would be a great place to find a neighborhood court and do a film that would sort of spend its time, and not a long time, it was going to be a short, on a court where there were some young dreamers and maybe some, you know, former players who had tried and failed to achieve their dreams in some fashion. And then maybe on that court there was some great NBA player who had come off of that court that everyone aspires to be. So that was the initial idea, perfectly good idea, I think. But then when we finally got around to starting the project, because we couldn't raise any money to do that, finally raised a little bit of money from an Illinois Arts Fellowship, like $2,000. So we decided we needed to go out and just start shooting something. And of course, I was a film guy, I wanted to shoot film, but that wasn't possible, so we shot video. And it was during that first week of shooting that we discovered, when we were looking for a court to focus on, that through this guy, Earl Smith, who was a expert on the courts in Chicago and something of a amateur street agent for some of the high schools, you know, he discovers Arthur on one of the courts we were looking at, and it became sort of readily apparent to us, and by us I mean myself and my collaborators on the film, producers, Peter Gilbert and Frederick Marks, and Peter was the cinematographer, and Fred was one of the editors. Anyway, it became clear that this was a really interesting story, like what's going on with this kid, and Earl's interest in this kid, and his desire to take him out to this sort of storied basketball program at St. Joseph's in the suburb where Isaiah Thomas had starred, and see if he might be able to go out there and play ball. So, you know, it's almost like immediately the idea of staying on a inner city court was jettisoned in favor of sort of this, who is this kid and what's Earl going to do with him and what's going to happen to him. And so when we got out to the high school and Arthur played at the camp, and he actually got to play his idol, who was Isaiah Thomas, at the camp, when Coach Pingatore says, and it's in the film, you know, if you work hard at the grades, you come here, in 4 years I could help you go to college. We thought, what an extraordinary promise that was to make to this young kid who he had just met and watched play in his camp. And I think that's where the idea was born, that maybe somehow we might be able to periodically check in and sort of see what becomes of this kid over the course of those 4 years.
Let me interrupt for a second and see if we can run this this trailer for Hoop Dreams right here. I will warn you that I've had some technical issues this morning, and this may or may not work on some of the clips, so we'll find out right now if it's going to run.
West comeback are slipping away. McGuire for three. I have never seen an all-star game that had such spectacular passing and plays and thundering plays like this. From beginning to end, Billy. Oh, what a way to end this ball game.
So this isn't the trailer, Chuck. I don't know if you know that. This is like the beginning of the movie.
All right. Well, we're going to watch it anyway, if it's all right with you.
And now
Yeah, fine.
I want to, play in the NBA like anybody else would want to be. That's something I think about all the time, playing in the NBA.
He's just doing something that he loves so much. He just loves it so much until, I'm just happy for him.
If somebody can understand the way William played, that'll make me feel a lot better, I said, where they should have understood the way I play.
Okay. So as I told you, and just before we went on the air, I'm sort of stunned watching this film because I can remember seeing it in 1994, and it seems almost more powerful today than maybe it was then. In a way, I'm not sure. It certainly had a stronger effect on me, and the lives of these then 14-year-old boys when you started the film and then went into college. I was also struck, I don't know if I'm the only one, but I had really strong negative feelings about the coach and about the school by the end of the film. It just felt like, on the one hand, maybe they were going to get a better life opportunity, but they were being exploited by the school. And then when the parents of Adji couldn't pay the half of the tuition after being there for a period of time, that they kicked him out of the school, and then they didn't send his transcripts to the other school, and they threatened the possibility of his graduation. I don't know, I felt like, my gosh, this is unbelievable from any school, let alone a religious school. I don't know. Did you get that kind of feedback from other people, or is it just me, too?
Well, I think I think your reaction was one that we heard quite a bit, and I remember watching the film with an audience from time to time. Like at Sundance where it premiered, and when that scene went by where the AGs go out to try and work out the deal to make payments so they can get a transcript, and people watching the film know the desperate financial situation that the AGs find themselves in. The guy at the school who's talking it through with them, the financial guy at the school, does not. But I remember audiences were kind of hissing during that scene, which was surprising to me because I just wasn't prepared for the level of sort of reaction that people would have.
Well, I think that's a good thing, though, that people were emotionally involved in the film, and you felt so strongly to kind of want to reach out and help these kids in some way if you could.
Absolutely.
And I've gone online and I've watched the video. I think there's some 50th anniversary of Kartemquin party where both the men, now adults, appear, and they both are very well dressed and they look, nice and successful, and I know that they've had their ups and downs, but it was great to see them on the one hand looking healthy and looking good and being so positive about the film, and on the other hand, I did a little more research and I found out about the brother and about I think it was Agee's father that was murdered during a robbery or something, and it's like, oh my goodness, it's like, this is the reality of living in the urban ghetto and the dangers that they faced, right?
Yeah, no, they were not made immune to what happens too often in the inner city, for sure. Both families suffered tragic losses. Absolutely. I mean, that's I might be getting ahead of myself, but that's one of the reasons why I was inspired to want to do this film, The Interrupters, some years later. But we can talk about that later if you want.
Well, I want to finish with Hoop
Yeah.
Dreams. I mean, you know, Adji on the video from the Kartemquin party talks about your showing up the first day, and these two or three white guys kind of show up cold, and he was 14 years old, and they were then when you told them, I think you wanted to make a short film about street basketball, they said, okay, oh great, you know, we better protect these guys and make sure how did you feel down in the south side of Chicago with, you know, being out of your normal territory and having
Right.
expensive camera gear and so on and so forth? Did you ever feel threatened or anything?
No, and actually, technically, Hoop Dreams was made on the west side of Chicago, which is also a tough neighborhood, like the south side can be, and in Cabrini Green, which is now gone, you know, all these years later, but was a near north side, you know, infamous housing project, poor and desperate. That's where William lived. You know, it's funny, when we first went out that first week, we brought along as a kind of an assistant, production assistant, if you will, camera assistant, a filmmaker, a budding filmmaker named Brian Pitts, who was a 7-foot player for the Northwestern's basketball team, black player, and who was also wanting to work in the business. And we thought, you know, it might be a good idea to have someone like Brian along, not because of his size, although he was quite big, but just so that we could put a kind of proper face forward in the neighborhood, and I think there was an element of just, you know, wanting to make sure we would be more welcome. Brian only worked with us that first week, and then after that it was just really me and Peter and Frederick, and oftentimes it was just me and Peter out there. And we never felt really threatened at all. I mean, I think one or two times, a guy would come up and be very curious about our camera gear and ask questions about how much it was worth, and we would use that as an opportunity to move on, just in case. But, you know, for the most part, we were extremely welcomed in the community, and that, I think, was in part because we were there a lot, and in part because we were welcomed by the families in that community, you know, that we were following, and Arthur and William, and that went a long way towards giving us a kind of credibility and acceptance there.
I want to also add to this conversation, people watching live, if you want to ask Steve a question, we're monitoring Twitter. Use the @Westock Online, and I'll occasionally look over and see if there's any questions from anybody that wants to ask. What was the actual relationship or process between you and the cameraman and the third man that you mentioned? Was that a sound person? So was it you, a cameraman, and a sound man most of the time, or what was the setup?
Yeah, so Peter Gilbert shot Hoop Dreams, and Frederick Marks, who was also one of the producers, was one of the editors on Hoop Dreams. So, but Frederick would be out in the field some with us, but as it went on, typically it was me and Peter, and oftentimes there was a sound person named Adam Singer who worked with us. But then there were probably about half the time in the field, it was just me and Peter, and I did the sound, and that was budgetary. But it was also intimacy, you know. It made it possible for us to be smaller and more intimate in our process, and that's something that I've done over the years. You know, usually it's 2 of us or 3 of us max. And I like working as small as possible because I just think it makes for the most sort of intimate footage and relationship.
So What happened after you had spent, what, a year with the boys and they've gotten into St. Joe's and they're there? And was there a time when when you looked at each other and said, so what are we doing? We've been here a year. I mean, you didn't know how far you were going to go or when it was going to be over, or what was the process? Because you were there for 5 years. When did you think we got to stick with this?
Yeah, I mean, I think we did have this kind of it was really kind of a fantasy scenario that we might check in with them over the course of the 4 years. That we arrived at that idea fairly early on in my recollection. But we had no money, we had no funding, so we weren't sure how that might work. But you're right that somewhere in that first year, because both boys were at St. Joe's, William was playing on the varsity, Arthur was playing on the freshman team. I remember cutting a demo and to try to raise money with and showing it to some people, and they had a hard time keeping the two boys straight. They were kind of like, "Why are you following two guys? I'm not really getting the rationale for following both these guys." And of course, because we were basketball former players of various abilities and fans, we were like, "Well, don't you see William is a star in the making and Arthur may not be?" And they were like, "Yeah, I'm not really getting that." So there was a kind of like, what are we doing factor there. And I think we realized we were really on to something more significant sophomore year, when Arthur's family couldn't hold up their end of the payments, and they were forced to pull him out of St. Joe's and have him go to the local Chicago Public High School, which was a very different environment than St. Joe's. And William at that time was still on a trajectory of stardom. I think at that point we realized that we were onto something, and there was a real rationale for following both these kids.
So Hoop Dreams, I can't recommend it strongly enough for anybody that's likes film, whether it's documentary or any other kind. And as a matter of fact, I think 1994, Siskel and Ebert named this the best film of the year, not the best documentary, the best film of the year. So it's available as a Criterion DVD. Is it available anywhere else?
You can probably get it. I don't know. It's probably available on iTunes or something. I don't know, but it's definitely that's the only DVD. Criterion has the corner on that market. And that's a good way to get it if you're still into DVDs, because the Blu-ray, and if you like Blu-rays, the Blu-ray is a restored, quote-unquote, version of Hoop Dreams, which basically looks better than it looked when it came out. With advances in technology, they were able to take the video that we shot it on way back then, which was not high def, and make it look kind of like high def. So it looks better than ever.
And I want to sort of apologize for that. I noticed during this trailer that the 4:3 image in this software was pushed out,
stretching it,
and the lower thirds were off the screen. And when I watched on my high def flat screen, I think it's on the Criterion. It's still 4:3, but it just looks it looks fantastic, and it's great. It couldn't look bad, and I think it looked better than, I'm sure I probably watched it on a VHS when it came out, or maybe was it on PBS when it came out originally?
Yeah, it played on PBS. Yep.
Yeah. I also noticed in the credits, I don't know if you even know this, you probably do, I'm sure. The credits are going by, and there's a whole bunch of people that were involved. There's a person by the name of Jill Soloway that's in the credits. Did you know that? The same Jill Soloway, I guess.
It is the same. I like to say I launched her career. She was an intern at Cartemquin back during the time that we made Hoop Dreams, and obviously I didn't launch her career, but she was pretty great and pretty entertaining person in her early years, and obviously she went on to do great things.
Without going into too much detail, and I really don't know the answer to this, and because I I've somehow got on the email list of Cartemquin, and I get all these emails from them about all the stuff that they're doing. But I really am not, because I'm not in Chicago, maybe, is part of it. Can you tell us a little bit about Cartemquin and what is your relationship to them? Are you a part of that full time, or is what?
Yeah. No, I'd be happy to. So Cartemquin is this production company that started as a collective back in the 60s. And back then very much devoted to social action, social change, and using documentary in that way. When I moved to Chicago, I knew about Cartemquin, and so we went to Cartemquin and pitched the idea of the half-hour version of Hoop Dreams, and hoping that they would kind of take us under their wing and give us guidance and legitimacy to try and do this film. And Gordon Quinn, who is the Quinn of Cartemquin, it was made up of the three names of the founders, really loved the idea. And then, of course, when it morphed into what it became with Hoop Dreams, he remained very, very much dedicated to it. So ever since then, Cartemquin has been my, real production home for documentary work. And I've made a bunch of docs now through there, including Abacus, the most recent one. And it's really a unique institution. I am kind of surprised there aren't more Cartemquins around the country, but it's an arts organization. It's a not-for-profit. It acts as a home to filmmakers. It helps them get their funding. It provides services from, it has the gear and the edit suites and everything. And above all, it's like a community of filmmakers here in Chicago that where we work on one another's films, and we give feedback on the films, and it really is a kind of extraordinary organization.
And you're also, we're going to get to Abacus, and I don't even know that I've mentioned it at the beginning, that you're nominated for an Academy Award, but we're definitely going to talk about Abacus in a minute. But I don't want to forget, you're also executive producer on Edith and Eddie, aren't you?
Yes, Laura Checkaway's film, which is nominated in the shorts documentary category this year. I met Laura a few years ago when she approached me at a event and told me about a feature doc she was making at the time that she'd been shooting for 5 years on this very troubled young woman that lived in the Bronx named Lucky. And I was really taken with what she told me about the film, and so I got involved in that film as a consulting editor, and I think I was eventually an exec producer on that, and helped her with her first film, which is a really powerful portrait in and of itself. So when she went to do this next film, she involved me as an exec producer on it, and I'm really proud of Laura and the work she's done with this film. It really is an extraordinary short film.
Well, we had her on an earlier show when we had the doc short nominees, and the film is quite good. She told me, I think she shot for another year and a half after, of stuff that didn't get in the film, that they didn't know when to stop, so to speak.
Well, yeah, I mean, she originally was conceiving of Edith and Eddie as a feature doc, and then at a certain point, she made this really brilliant decision to make it a short, because she decided she wanted to just focus on a very discrete time in the story, and I think it was the right decision, and it resulted in a incredible film.
You're involved in a whole bunch of films that I haven't even mentioned yet, The Interrupters and Stevie and Abacus, but I'd like to talk about life itself, about Ebert, and how did that come about, and I'm curious a little bit about that film.
Yeah, that film came about because one of the producers on it, Garrett Bash, who works with Steve Zalian, approached me and said that he had read Roger's memoir, Life Itself, and thought it would be a great basis for a documentary. And at the time, I hadn't read the book, so I got the book, and I read it, and I agreed. I just thought, what a phenomenal story, with lots of surprises about Roger Ebert. And so I agreed to pursue that with Garrett, and the thing about it is that I had great fondness for Roger because he had been a huge supporter of Hoop Dreams. I think it's arguable that he and Gene Siskel made a huge difference in the profile that film had out in the world. at the time. And then Roger had also been very supportive of other works like Stevie and the Interrupters. He was a real big supporter of, publicly so. And so I love the idea of doing a film about someone who had been really, terrific to me, not as a thank you, but just because I just thought he was kind of this amazing guy. But I wouldn't have done it if I read the memoir and didn't kind of feel like, he was a great guy still. If I read the memoir and thought, gee, he's a great critic, but I'm not that crazy about him, I would have politely declined, but that was not the case.
I can't remember, but had he already told the world that he was ill when you started the film, or not?
Oh yeah, no, he had been ill for some time, and I think one of the powerful things about the memoir, the written memoir, is my dog is getting agitated here. I'm trying to pet him as we talk. Dodger, you need to settle down. Settle down. Anyway, one of the brilliant things about the book is, come here.
Well, you got to
anyone who knows. Anyone who knows me knows about my dog.
Let's see the dog. Let's see the dog.
Okay. Do you see him?
Not a very good shot.
Yeah,
but it's okay.
he's black, so he's a little hard to see. Come here. Just come over here and be with me. No, one of the brilliant things about the memoir is that Roger writes very candidly and movingly about the illness, and it's interspersed. The chapters about the illness are interspersed with a look back on his own life. And so if you've seen the film Life Itself, we do a very similar thing. We go back and forth between the present and the past, because I was just really struck by what a great idea that was. And me, I'm going to rip off a great idea if I can. And what we didn't know going into filming Life Itself was that this would end up being the last 4 or 5 months of Roger's life during the period of time that we were filming with him. And so that was not that aspect of that film where you're seeing the end of Roger's life was not something that was at all planned for. It just happened.
So let's see if this trailer will run. I told you I had some technical difficulties, but we'll try and run this clip from Life Itself.
Okay.
Keep your fingers crossed.
All right.
And
it's approved.
Your mic
Let's
is
move on to
live.
a movie now that's one of the most brilliant, weird, and unusual American documentary films I've seen in a long time.
Roger Ebert was the definitive mainstream film critic in American cinema.
He has been writing for half of the history of feature films. Roger was a mature writer early on.
He's written over a dozen books.
He wrote a novel.
He won a Pulitzer Prize.
How on earth did Roger Ebert write Beyond the Valley of the Dolls?
Boobs.
Beyond the Valley. This is a title.
Roger was good at dishing, but he also could take it. He is a nice guy, but he's not that nice.
It's Thriller Week on Siskel and Ebert in the movies, and we've got 3 new ones.
Sound a little excited, Gene.
Sound less excited, Roger.
Roger Ebert and Gene Siskel were the most powerful critics of all time.
The perfect matching of opposites.
Even though Roger wrote Beyond the Valley of the Dolls, Gene lived the life.
These were towering figures clashing.
It was, I'm going to crush you.
You give Benji the Hunter a positive review.
That's totally unfair because you realize
they almost didn't care what anyone else thought as long as they could try to persuade the other.
This morning I confess that I am a sick person. 3 years ago, I felt a lump under my chin, and it turned out to be cancer.
Roger had an inner core made of steel.
You want to rest a little bit or work a little bit?
Ask Steve. He's the director.
He is a soldier of cinema who cannot even speak anymore, and he plows on. And that touches my heart very deeply.
As a film critic, he was somebody who gave life to new voices, gave life to new visions that reflected all the diversity of this nation.
He made it possible for a bigger audience, a wider audience, to appreciate cinema as an art form because he really loved films.
For me, the movies are like a machine that generates empathy. It lets you understand hopes, aspirations, dreams, and fears. It helps us to identify with the people who are sharing this journey with us.
as a film critic, did he try and tell you how to make the film, or don't shoot this, or make sure you get a cutaway, or
Well, it's a great question. It's funny, when we were about to begin the film, Roger emailed me. A lot of our correspondence was not just in person, but across email, and that's one of the reasons I included that aspect of it in the film. And he emailed me and he said, "I've informed Chaz, his wife, that this is different from the other stuff we will have done. This is your documentary, and you make the film you're going to make. And, I just want to let you know I filled her in on that." And I wrote him back and I said, "Roger, I really appreciate that. But I also want to say to you that I welcome, and I say this to anyone, I welcome your input as we go along, because ideally I want this to feel like an experience in which we are making this film together, not me making a film on you." And that, Chuck, applies to every film I do, not just film critics in a film. But that's what I aim for, even though I have to maintain editorial control and final say on things and all of that. But I wanted to let, I'm grabbing my dog, I wanted to let him know that. And so as the film went on, he was very careful about it, but he would occasionally speak up about things that he thought were important. And some of those are definitely, those moments where he's speaking up about the film are in the film. And I really love that about the experience with him, because he is brilliant.
So what is it that you do that's so magical to gain the trust of the people that you are filming and the intimacy inside their lives? I mean, you can go back to Hoop Dreams. You can see it there, and you certainly in life itself, and in Abacus the same thing. I mean, what do you say or do? And this is from one filmmaker to another and out to the world of filmmakers. Hey, I want to come to your house and shoot everything that you do, 24/7 for 5 years, more or less.
Well, that's the thing. Number one, I don't say that. I think that there's a number of things that contribute to the way I work that help that. And every filmmaker has different, ways of getting there, I think. First and foremost, I think it's important that people understand what it is that interests you about them and their story, and that they understand it honestly. That it doesn't feel like you're bullshitting people to try to rope them into being in your film, because people see through that. I think another key is I don't make a big deal about what we're making. Certainly on Hoop Dreams, we had no idea what would become of that film. And what became of it exceeded anybody's wildest expectations. But when we were making it, we were just a few guys who drove a shitty car, who would show up and film with them, and it was no big deal. And I've kind of adopted that approach in every film since. It's one of the reasons why I like to work small. It's one of the reasons why I still drive a shitty car, I guess. But we don't make a big deal of it. I don't go in making promises of that this is going to be at Sundance or this is going to get out in theaters or any of that, because frankly, I don't know that any of that's going to happen anyway, and that's not productive. I think another key is people need to feel a kind of agency in the process. It goes back to what I was just saying about making a film with people. They need to feel like they're doing this with you, not they're just someone under a microscope of you making a film on them. And that means at times being willing to walk away from situations that they really don't want you to film, or give and say, look, I get it. We don't need to be there today, or that doesn't need to be in the film. Because I think when people feel like they have some agency in the process, then they also are much more willing and open to letting you in to their lives. And then I think the last thing is, and this is something I tell filmmakers in various masterclass settings and things I've done, is don't be an asshole. People your subjects have to want to spend time with you. And if you're one of these suffering artist assholes, which, there are a few of them out there, people will find a reason not to be around you. And I only work with people who are good with people. too themselves, because it's not just about my relationship with the subjects, it's also about the people I'm working with. And so we try to have a good time. And that may seem weird in a way when you're doing a film like, say, The Interrupters, which is about very intense and sort of tragic situation of violence in Chicago. But nonetheless, we still had a good time with our main subjects because we enjoyed each other's company, even though there were times when it was, of course, really sad and tragic.
I have so many questions I want to ask, but a short question. I mean, maybe there's no good answer, and it's not a good question either. It's like
my problem is I don't give short answers. That's your problem.
The Interrupters is about a group of people trying to stop the violence in Chicago, and yet today, how many years later, the violence in Chicago the statistics keep going up and up and up on the number of murders in Chicago. Yes.
Yes. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to see if I let my dog out of this room, if that will satisfy him. So just
I'm going to do a commercial while you're doing that.
All right.
So this is a good time for a break, and just to say, I want to thank the sponsors again, who are responsible for bringing this show to you. In no particular order, LumaForge is a independent company of filmmakers that are making hard drives, and if you're in the filmmaking business, you really ought to go to lumaforge.com and you should contact them. They make hard drives that are optimized for film editing and at a very reasonable price, and they seem to be ahead of the curve in what's going on technologically. Media Central is a small agency that's in 111 countries, and if you need a freelance camera person, you should call Jay at Media Central and talk to him about what you need. You need a 4K camera, handheld, or for commercial, or for run and gun. He knows cameramen everywhere, and I've used them personally, so I'm comfortable suggesting him. And Pond 5 is only the largest supplier of stock footage and After Effects and music and sound effects. And go to Pond 5, POND5.com. They're really a fabulous company, and they're great to deal with, and it's easy, so you can download watermarked clips, use them in your film, and then when you're ready to lock your picture, you can purchase the clips for a very reasonable price. So we're here with Steve James, who is live from Chicago, from his office with his dog, and you haven't seen my dog, or my dogs wander in yet, but you might, I don't know. Are there scenes that got away that you wish you had filmed in Hoop Dreams or Interrupters or Life Itself? It seems as a documentary filmmaker, sometimes when you show up at somebody's house, they sometimes say, you should have been here 20 minutes ago because we just had this thing or whatever. I mean, is there anything that jumps out?
Yeah, no, that happens all the time. And usually when it happens, my reaction, probably yours too, is like, oh my God, I can't believe we missed that, right? And oftentimes it would be a great thing to have gotten. But, in the grand scheme of things, if you're putting in the time, on these films, you get enough. And of course, the art of editing is to make people never feel like they missed anything of importance in your story, right? So I can think of a great example from Hoop Dreams. At one point, Arthur Agee's family, Sheila and Bo, it was a pretty troubled relationship between Arthur's parents. And at one point, Sheila divorced Bo in the midst of our filming. Now, this is not in the film at all that they got divorced, but they did get divorced. And for years, they did not want this public, so we never talked about it, but they're fine with it now, or, they were fine with it, so I can talk about it. But they got divorced, and then they got remarried. And when they got remarried, Sheila, who I had regular contact with about everything, just didn't tell me. And I call up one day to check in on her, and she's over the moon excited, and I go, what's going on? She goes, oh, Bo and I just got remarried yesterday. And I was like, what? We should have been there, and she was like, well, yeah, I should have called you, but we just decided to do it. And so of course Peter and I rushed over there, and we got the aftermath of all the excitement and her pointing to a just married sign on her door, and you know, and eventually we even edited a scene around all this because there was actually a little video that had been shot of it too. So we could have put it in the movie. But they asked at that time not to put it in because they didn't want people to know that they had actually gotten divorced and remarried, and so we didn't. And that was one of those situations where we were willing to leave something out of the film that was important to them and that was meaningful to them, and we didn't need it in the film. But at the time I was just like totally freaked out that like how could we have possibly missed this this moment.
Let's switch gears, and so we don't run out of time, I do want to talk about your latest film, which is Abacus Small Enough to Jail, which I don't know why I was intrigued with from day one, even before I saw the film. I guess I saw a trailer or something, and I was curious about the film, and it's one of those films that does not let you down. It's a fabulous film. But on the surface, aftermath, I'm thinking about you as a filmmaker living in Chicago. Here is a family living in New York with a trial that you're not allowed into film, with the prosecutors that won't let you film them, the defense attorneys won't let you film them, and it's in, with the Chinese community in Chinatown in downtown New York, 1,000 miles away. What got you interested in this film, and how did you deal with that?
Yeah, we really tried to stack the deck against ourselves with this one. We also didn't have a lot of money at first, well, if ever, but so we kind of did this very bare bones, which meant me and Mark Mitten, the producer that's Chicago-based on the film, traveling to New York, for shoots during the trial. And Mark Mitten was the key to this film getting started to begin with. Mark is someone that I worked with for off and on for a number of years. He was on Life Itself as well, and Mark knew the family going back a decade, and he was privy to this situation that was going on to them in this imminent trial that was not being reported on the mainstream media. And so at one point, he just really felt like this was an important story and it should be told. So he contacted me and gave me the broad strokes of what was going on and how he knew this family. And I was definitely intrigued enough that I decided to go to New York with Mark. We recruited Julie Goldman, who is this fabulous New York-based producer of many documentaries. And with her help, we got a great crew in place. And we shot for a few days. And based on that, a few days, I think it was day 2, that I decided, okay, we have to do this, because it was, even though we weren't, like you say, going to get access to the trial, that became clear right away. And we weren't going to get access to the prosecution during the trial. And as it turned out, although I didn't know this on day 2, we weren't even going to get access to the lawyers for the Sungs during the trial. I just fell in love with the family and with their integrity, their sense of purpose. What they were going through just seemed really wrong. And they also were just really entertaining, to me as a family. I was very intrigued by them and wanted to spend time with them. And a lot of times, that's a key for me is that if I find subjects that I'm really hooked by personally and intrigued by, I have this belief that if we do our job right, that you as a viewer will also be hooked by and intrigued by and compelled by.
Let's see if this clip will roll in here. Let's keep our fingers crossed. Nope, this clip's not going to work. Okay, now I'm going to try and let's try.
I never thought my girls would work in Chinatown because we lived in Greenwich, Connecticut. Tom would be commuting every day, like an hour and a half each way. So he didn't see them that much in those days. They had no idea, anything, not a faintest idea about the Chinese community. In fact, Heather still does. She hates the city, she's like me, we both have headaches. And at home, when we don't want them to understand, we speak Chinese.
You always said to me, if you come work for the bank, the benefit will be you have a 9 to 4 job.
9 to 4? He said that?
Because a long time ago, people could leave at 3 for the bank. He said you can have children, you can have a family.
You know what he said to me? He said,
If you wish to work with me, remember, this is your own choice. And don't think it's going to be easy. You gave me two different stories.
I go back to the same question about intimacy, and I wonder about what was it like when you had a camera in their home or in their where they were eating, and these are very articulate, very bright attorneys and the president of a bank, so they're not like blue collar workers, anywhere off in the street. What did they try and manage? Because they had a heck of a lot at stake here, right?
They did. No, they didn't try to manage us at all. I think they left the filmmaking to us. I think for them, and it's true. It's also true of a lot of films I've done. There were much more compelling and important things going on in their lives for them to focus on than to focus on us. And they, I think some of them had some initial misgivings about a film being made. Jill, for example, who was the current president of the bank, had taken over for her father. She felt the stress of running the bank and dealing with the trial, and she worried that dealing with us was going to just add more stress. But, as it went on, she relaxed about that because I think she saw that we weren't really trying to do that we were just trying to do our best to capture what was going on for them. But I think another key, and this is something I have found over the years with virtually all the films I've done, is that there's something about this process of making a film on people that also gives them something that I think is unexpected for them. We know what we get, Chuck, when we make a film. We get a story, we get the opportunity to, live with people in their lives and understand something about what they're going through. But I think what the subjects get from the process is they get this sort of sounding board. They get an almost therapeutic relationship sometimes with the filmmaker and with the film, because at different junctures, we're asking them to reflect on their lives and reflect on what's going on in their lives at this moment, but also across the span of their life. And there's something real that can be really sort of beautiful about that, I think, for subjects in a documentary that they didn't expect going in. And that certainly happened here. There's a great moment for me in the film where Chanterelle, the youngest daughter who worked for Cyrus Vance, the DA of New York, talks about when she found out that her family was being investigated and how devastating that was to know that her boss was doing that to her family, and it eventually leads to her leaving the DA's office. And it's a very emotionally wrought moment of interview in the film. And she told us afterwards that she had not been able to bring herself to really talk about that even with her family up until now, and she was surprised that she actually went there in the interview. But she was glad she did, because it was sort of cathartic for her.
Were there moments going in at the beginning of the film when you weren't sure which way the trial was going to go?
Yeah.
And you reminded me about the daughter working for Cyrus Vance, and in retrospect, watching the film, it's like, what were they thinking? Were they just trying the DA? Were they? Yeah. Do you think? I mean, maybe this is an unfair question, and don't answer it if it is. But do you think in their minds that they actually thought that the bank was trying to defraud people, and that this was that? It's like, it's mind-boggling what was going on, because of the all the big banks that kind of like got off the hook, and here is this little teeny bank in Chinatown that was trying to help people, and they went after them.
I want to believe, and I do believe, that in their minds that DA Vance Jr. and his prosecution team believed that the bank was complicit in some way in the low-level fraud that the bank actually discovered and took steps to eliminate themselves, right? I believe they think they were complicit and possibly orchestrated the fraud. How they arrived at that is beyond me. But I think that for sure their determination was clouded by some ambition here. And that ambition, I think, was that Cyrus Vance Jr. wanted to be the prosecutor who brought a bank to its knees in the wake of the 2008 crisis, because none of the big banks got any felony convictions or indictments. They only paid fines. And I think what makes me believe that is that when you look at the spectacle of the indictment, when he had people chained together who were basically low-level bank employees and mostly ex-employees. They didn't even work for Abacus at that point. They were from the past. When he chained them together, when he had the feds from Washington standing behind him, when he made the announcement and he made the connection to 2008, I think it revealed the motives there. And but your original question about did we worry about how the outcome of this was going to be? I mean, I actually think that and I think the Sungs were too, and their lawyers were too, were a little bit confident that they thought this was going to work out for them during the course of the trial, because they felt like they were winning the trial. They felt like, the lawyers told us off camera, they wouldn't say it on camera, that they felt like they were winning each day of the trial, which is the way I guess lawyers look at this, right? How did we win today? And they felt like they were winning way more. And so I think that when the deliberation went on for 10 days, it was a surprise to everyone. And of course, it was, nail biting for everyone.
What was your feeling when you got there and you committed to doing the film, and then you discovered that they wouldn't let you in the courtroom, the prosecutors wouldn't let you behind closed doors, even with a deal to say, we won't show anything until, and
I made all those arguments.
And to add insult to injury, the defense lawyers wouldn't let you in.
I know. I couldn't believe that. Like, defense lawyers are supposed to be egomaniacs, right? Aren't they? They're supposed to want to be the star, but these guys were unusual in that regard, and they were great lawyers. Well, yeah, I mean, I think what we decided is that that the family's experience of this trial was at heart going to be the story we tell, and frankly, it should be the story we tell. But what we did do, which I think was fortuitous, is we decided that we would hire a great courtroom artist to go to the trial for several days and do drawings that we knew once we got to post and decided which parts of the trial we wanted to feature in the film, that we would have a leg up in terms of trying to bring those to life. And that's exactly what we did. We hired Christine Cornell, who just happens to be the best courtroom artist in New York City. She did some baseline drawings, and then in post, we essentially storyboarded the trial with her, because we have angles in our illustrations that you would never see an actual courtroom illustrator do, because they're always locked into one spot. So I was really pleased with how we were able to try and bring the trial to life, because that was essential, and use that with reenactments of the testimony, which is what we did. But I would be lying if I said I wasn't concerned, because on top of it all, this is what they call often derisively a paper trial, meaning it's economic stuff, it's fraud, and it's not sexy. And we had a duty to sort of do the trial in its complexity. At the same time, we didn't want to put people to sleep,
I hate the term casting as it applies to documentaries, but I can't think of a better word, really, unless you can. But what did you make this film based on? Your day or two there meeting the Sun family, and did you were they were sort of cast, and you thought, oh, well, this'll work for a film, or was it a combination of the story and the people, or what was it that pushed you into making this film?
It was definitely a combination. I mean, it was the case itself and the sort of ironies, and injustices that seemed to be at work going on. Although we were really clear with the Sungs that we were going to do our best to get the case against them into the film, that was going to be important to show that, and they were fine with that. But I think it was a combination of this story seems too important to not be told, and no one seems to be telling it. Frankly, I mean, the New York Times didn't tell it. They did 2 stories on this case. They did the indictment, Spectacle, and they did the decision, which were 3 years later. So I think it was that, and it was the family. It was like, this is a really fascinating family. They Mr. Sung he seems like a Hollywoodized version of who the founder of this bank should be. He's a handsome, some might say Jimmy Stewart-like Chinese version of George Bailey. And, so everything about them just said, these are really interesting people. And I hadn't even met Mom yet. I didn't meet Mom until, several weeks in, because the word is that Mom didn't want to be in the film. And my God, what a loss that would have been.
And she was fantastic. She was just great.
She kind of steals the movie.
What a rock.
Yeah.
I had a question in my mind I was going to ask you. Just when we talked about Mom, it left me. What was the question? Boy, this is what happens when you get over 30.
Yeah. Yeah, I've been there.
You want to talk
I am there.
A little bit about the morals of a filmmaker? I know you like to speak to that a bit, about what is the obligation that a filmmaker has when they're doing an unscripted show like this. I mean, what if you had discovered that
they were guilty?
Yeah,
or whatever. Well, I think that in this case with Abacus, like I said, we were really clear with them that we were going to present the case against them, and I think, and it was important, and it took great effort for us to get that into the film, but we did succeed in doing that. But we were clear with them that regardless of the outcome, we're making the film. And one of the things I had to talk to Mark about, because he had this relationship with them going back 10 years, is I said, we have to be kind of careful here with our relationship with them, because we don't know what we're going to find. Now, having said that, it was like, I believed, in my soul that these folks were innocent, and that we were going to essentially tell the story from their point of view, unless facts came in that made us suddenly believe that, they were truly guilty. And if that was the case, then there would have been a turn in this film for us as well as for the viewer. I think we would have preserved that turn in the film itself that we would have gone through, where we would have suddenly been like, oh my God, well, maybe these people aren't as principled as we thought they were. But that never happened. And so, that's the film we made. But to the larger issue, I feel an obligation in all the films I do is to present people as fully complicated as I can. But the obligation I feel also to the main subjects of the film, and that's a word I wish we had a better term for in documentary, because they're not characters, but subjects feels kind of antiseptic. But I feel an obligation to the main subjects to also present them empathically, to help people understand who they are. And I have film subjects over the years that are less than, inspiring, if you will. And I still feel that same obligation. I'm not trying to whitewash them. I'm not trying to get you to love them, but I do feel an obligation to present them in a way that you understand them.
So am I correct that in your past, you've also directed some scripted shows, some movies? And my question would be, how has your documentary background, how did it influence your directing scripted shows and vice versa?
Yeah. Well, the great thing about doing the scripted stuff is I finally made some money. That was a good thing. The first one I did is there. You can see there it is, the Prefontaine, clapper in the background on my wall. Prefontaine was the first I did. All three of the ones I did 2 cable movies too, were based on true stories, and they were all sports related because of Hoop Dreams. That's what people were willing to let me do. So, I because they were true stories, or mostly true, because, the serious poetic license that can go on in feature films based on true stories, I tried to hew as closely to the truth as possible, given my documentary background. And that's something I felt an obligation to do. I think one of the more interesting sort of things I realized in the process of making them is that working with actors for me, was not that different than working with subjects in documentaries, meaning the goal is to try to get at something that feels really essentially true, and get past all of the pretense of the making of the film and the things that can cloud the pursuit of something essentially true and real. And that's something you're trying to always get to with your subjects in documentaries, and it's something that I think most actors will tell you that they're always trying to get at with the character they're playing in a film.
Well, actually, I think there are very few directors in the business who have done what you and I have done, because I've directed a lot of shows too. And I wonder how you approached the actors. Were you, in the beginning, somewhat intimidated by working with professional actors, or did you find yourself instinctively being able to deal with them as people as you have with your documentary subjects, or what was the mojo there?
That's a great question. I should probably take some lessons from you on this, because I think I got better at this very process as it went along with each of the films, the 3 films so far that I've made in Scripted World. I think it was a process, and with certain actors, I felt like I immediately had that kind of connection with, and could engage with them in a similar way to the way in which I would engage with one of my subjects in a documentary, but not with all of them. You know, it is a different animal in some respects, and I feel like now, and I would like to do more scripted. You know, I have designs and hopes to do that. I feel like now I'm in a much better place to deal with that process than I was back when I did those first 3, because I do feel that connection more strongly. Of it's really about connecting with people on a very basic human one-to-one level that's key, and giving faith to the actors, kind of like I'm making the film with them too, just like I'm making a documentary with my subjects. I'm making a film with them too, and I don't have to be the guy that has all the answers, you know, on the set about what's the best way to do stuff. You know, I can give that up.
What are you working on currently? What's in the future for Steve James?
Well, right now I'm finishing this docu miniseries, or whatever the right term is these days, called America to Me, which is, we spent a year in the high school here in Oak Park where I live, which is a very progressive public school, well-funded, very diverse, but there's been some real struggles in this community despite all that around race and academics. And so we spent a year in the school following a bunch of kids and teachers, and we've made a mini-series out of that called America to Me. We premiered the first 5 episodes at Sundance. It's going to be a 10-part series, and it's going to air later in the year on Starz. So we're very excited about that. I'm still knee-deep in that. Beyond that, you know, I have other things I want to do. I have some scripted projects that I'd love to do. One of them is, I can't really probably talk about them in detail, but one of them is a kind of faux documentary based on the true life of a sports figure, which I'm very excited about, because I think it'll be kind of a cool thing to do, that mashes together both kinds of filmmaking. And I have other projects. You know, I'm one of these filmmakers because I'm kind of, as I like to say, I'm at times I'm self-unemployed if I don't have a project going on. So I always try to have things in the hopper of what I want to do. They're coming down the pike, and I begin to plan them as I'm wrapping up any given project.
Well, Steve James, I want to say thank you very much for being on this live international broadcast web series. I hope people will continue to watch this beyond today live. And congratulations to you on Abacus, Small Enough to Jail, which is a phenomenal film. If you haven't seen it, folks, I think it's available on iTunes and probably somewhere on PBS.
Yep, Frontline.
And I would recommend to anybody, if you want to see a great documentary, another great documentary, beside the dozen or so that Steve has made This is the one that's gone down as, you know, that they identify with Steve, Hoop Dreams. It's a shocking documentary because it's so insightful and it's so current, and it tells the story of these two inner city families and what they go through. Basketball is the background and is a fascinating background, but it's really about these boys growing up and what happens to them, and it's an amazing story. And I think you should think about going back and rolling the cameras with them again. Speaking of rolling the cameras, I'm going to roll these credits as we say thank you to Steve, and stand by afterwards, please, Steve. And www.westdoconline.com. Thanks very much for joining us, and we'll see you in 2 weeks about the best camera reviewers online. Look for us. Thanks very much. Bye-bye.